Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the Society for Renaissance Studies Public Engagement Toolbox Conversations. And today it's my immense pleasure to be speaking with three brilliant experts and the people behind a really exciting project, initiative, maybe movement. So today I will be speaking with Dr. Andy Kesson, Reader in Renaissance Literature at the University of Roehampton, Dr. Emma Whipday, Lecturer in Renaissance Literature, Newcastle University, and Dr. Callan Davies, who's a Research Fellow at the University of Roehampton on the amazingly named Box Office Bears project. I want to start by thanking all three guests today for coming along for the second time after my rogue Wi-Fi scuppered us the last time we met. But we're here today to talk about a bit lit. And if you've been on early modern social media, on the early modern internet, you can't have failed to notice over the past year the incredible content, the videos, the conversations, the interviews, and now the podcast emerging from this wonderful project, three of whose hosts are with me today. So A Bit Lit started off, I think you've said, as a place for fun, relaxed and silly conversations about scholarship and creativity. And it's come to cover a huge amount more than just the early modern, if that's fair to say. So I wondered, Andy, do you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit about how it all began?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for this. I mean, it's a lockdown project, and it was very much the product of watching, various countries, various colleagues online in various countries thinking about the COVID outbreak and its implications for their working patterns, but also for their mental health and also for their sense of why what we do matters. And I saw that conversation happening across academia, but also across the various kinds of performance communities that I engage with. And it just felt really sad. I can't think of a time when the arts and humanities matter more really than when we are all locked down and looking to experience stories and a sense of community and of culture of various kinds. So it was really just a project intended to give a platform for celebrating those things, celebrating research and creativity, as you say, across time periods and across disciplines and across kinds of creative output.
Perfect. And Emma and Callan, how did you come to the project yourselves? Emma, we might start with you.
So I came to it because I came at a slightly different angle because I'd been thinking a lot about the kind of plight of teachers in the immediate lockdown with all the online learning they were having to facilitate, and the fact that there weren't that many online research-led resources for the study of things like Shakespeare. Obviously there was some, but it felt like there was a real hunger for more. So I was thinking about making some kind of, YouTube series of talking about my own Shakespeare research and maybe the Shakespeare research of others, and ways that that could be applied to sort of A-level, GCSE, even kind of years 8 and 9 learning about Shakespeare. And then I got a text from Andy with a brilliant idea of a bit lit kind of encapsulated in it. And I guess that opened it up for me, in that it meant that I could kind of have a platform for the stay at home Shakespeare series I wanted to do. But also I was really inspired by Andy's ideas about conversations and about facilitating these kind of conversations across the arts and humanities, particularly in a time when I wasn't getting to go to the British Library and have a coffee with people and learn about people's latest research. And it did feel quite academically lonely when so much was focused on getting the teaching out there, just managing, surviving, keeping the students going, and there wasn't much of a space for kind of research community. And then I think the other thing that it kind of appealed to me about it was the possibility for making the case for the importance of arts and humanities research at this time of crisis, when so much of the language was understandably about kind of medical research, scientific research, even sociological research, but there was no space for what we were all missing, for that storytelling Andy was mentioning. So I think that also really drew me to it.
It's fantastic. There's so much there that I want to get into a little later on. So talking about schools, community and storytelling, kind of three really key elements, I think, of what you've been doing. But Callan, how about you? How did you come to A Bit Lit?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what's been said as kind of appeals of thinking about ways of sharing, arts and literature research, but in particular, I'm quite interested in this idea of work in progress being shared or being part of a conversation of how research or making in other kinds of forms, performance and so on, how to kind of open that up and democratize it. And I think we've been interested in that in other projects, in sharing that in written form, in blogs, inviting people to come and talk. But at that moment, as Emma's saying, where you can't have these kind of chats at the British Library about something you're working on to develop ideas, I thought it was really appealing to be able to have these things recorded and open and accessible, but to do it in such an informal way that, it didn't have to be polished. Here's a little something I'm thinking about and working on. And I thought that was a really exciting kind of line to take. And so the casualness, I guess, of what A Bit Lit set out to do was really appealing.
Well, I think that's part of what makes it so kind of, well, exciting, but also really enjoyable and accessible as well. I was going to ask the three of you, actually, one of the things that's happened, looking at the recent videos and the recent podcasts, just the sheer range kind of from the academic to the creative, from the kind of very scholarly to the more public oriented, there's just such a range of topics as well, going from the early modern and from the medieval all the way through to the present day. And I wondered if you wanted to give a little bit of a sense of how you developed all of that content, or how you came to the notion of covering all of these different materials. And I thought maybe one way of doing it is that I might go around and ask each of you if you have maybe a particular favorite interview, maybe a couple of favorite moments. I know we all hate to play favorites, but to give a sense really of the range that you've managed to encapsulate. I wanted to get a sense of how that came about and what it's meant to you. Emma, could I start with you?
Yes. Oh gosh. Favorite interviews. I've now got them all racing through my head, and I feel very guilty about whichever ones I don't pick. But I think for me there was something really exciting about obviously I've mentioned Shakespeare already, and a lot of my research and interests are around Shakespeare. But I think in quite a short space of time, I talked to both Nora Williams and Ian Burrows about their current projects on Shakespeare. And Ian Burrows was looking at Shakespeare for snowflakes and looking at the questions around kind of trigger warnings and how do we teach Shakespeare, and the idea of, is it snowflakey to sort of require prior notice if you're dealing with really traumatic things? And he obviously thought not, but also how Shakespeare kind of stages and engages with trauma. And then Nora Williams was taking a kind of very different angle to similar questions by sort of actually asking, should we even be staging Shakespeare? Do we need to talk back to stage Shakespeare? Are there problems with allowing the kind of Shakespeare to be the voice of culture in the way that he so often is? And so they were taking completely different angles in ways that slightly blew my mind. And that was a really exciting sort of pair of interviews. So that was the first one that leapt into my head. So I will go with that, but I loved all of them.
That's very important to say, Callan, how about you?
Well, okay, I second that universal spirit. I guess, okay, well, to pick a couple of things out. First would be that I think what we're quite keen to do as a project is also to allow people to feed into it themselves. And so quite early on, we sort of set out with this idea of people talking about things and objects, which have come up a number of times in different ways in different people's research. And sort of Kathleen Kennedy ran with that. And she's been doing lots of research on coconuts. And she did this brilliant film, which James O'Prey, who's our editor and does some amazing stuff with the production of the films, animated all these little dancing coconuts. And so that was a really encouraging sort of early iteration of putting the driving force, I guess, of the videos out to someone else and letting them kind of take shape of their own way of sharing research and work in progress. So that was really fun. And then I think the second thing is what we're quite keen to do is speak beyond the early modern. So we three are early modernists, but the idea is of course that it's to do with creativity and artistic production of all kinds. And so I really enjoyed speaking to Jordan Buckner, who was an animator, to try and think about the interesting connections between research in the period that we look at and the kind of SRS umbrella idea of that period, and actually the connections there are to something that's outside of academia or sort of adjacent to it. So that was very exciting. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. I may need to ask more about dancing coconuts down the line. That's fantastic. Andy, how about you?
Yeah, again, I second everything everyone's saying already. I guess there are kind of two contexts to this. One is the academic context and one is the sort of public context. And yeah, I like the fact you can put something out publicly and digitally and not quite know what it might achieve and who might see it and what they might do with it. So it's been really exciting watching unexpected collaborations come out of the project. But ditto too, I think, kind of academically as well. It's really interesting how just the simple act of hosting a conversation can feel quite transformative. So we just made a film, it's not out yet, but it will be out in a few weeks, with Dustin Friedman and Rachel Mesh. Rachel's book, they both recently published books on queer and trans history in the 19th century. One on French trans or proto-trans people, depending on how you want to read Rachel's book, and then Dustin's book on 19th century queer communities, particularly in Oxford. And during the film, they basically said, why were we not speaking to each other when we were writing these books, and why were we not aware of each other's works? And the answer to that is discipline, and the way we kind of carve up what we do. And when we announced that film on Twitter and said it was coming out soon, we got a huge response from people. And I think it is that sense of bringing a conversation together that you'd think would be happening, but for various reasons attached to the way we divide up the kind of work that we do, just isn't. So yeah, I think there's a value to listening to somebody and learning from them. And it's something we don't often get to do publicly. I think we so often get invited into public as experts. So to go back to that point Cal made about work in progress, it's also nice being just a non-expert in the conversation, and your only real job is to stand back and let that person teach all of us something exciting about their work in progress.
It's always been what I think of as the joy of interviewing, really, is kind of being there and kind of learning as much as you can during the conversation. But I think that's something really interesting to raise as well, is that idea of the value of conversation in an academic context where we're often under pressure to present things that, even if they're not absolutely finished, that they are polished in a way. There are expectations of what academic work you present at a seminar will look like, for instance, and the ways that you'll express it. And to think about formats and this kind of recorded online format as a way that lets people push at that, and as you say, to have interdisciplinary conversations, I think is really, really important. One of the things, and I'm thinking here about the work that Rachel Willey has been doing with the SRS, and we have another fantastic public engagement toolbox interview with Rachel talking about how she's used the Crowdcast platform to run, book launches and debates and conversations of all kinds. One of the things that we've really noticed in the last year is something to do with audiences, which is where we were used to academic seminars that often for geographical reasons might have a relatively small number of people in the room. We find that even quite specific research conversations will now often have upwards of 100 people in a Crowdcast or something like that. And often when you ask people about, what's brought them to it, you get a much more diverse set of replies. You get people who are working in academic spheres, but also a whole variety of people from other backgrounds as well. I wondered if the three of you had any reflections on, I was going to say the a bit lit audience, but it's probably more accurate to say audiences that the videos have built up over time. Andy, we might start with you.
And to check, John, on the question is what we've learned about those audiences.
Yeah, do you have a sense of what the audiences for a bit lit are? Are they kind of different to what you might have expected? Have they changed over time? Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I guess from my perspective, Emma and Cal came in with much more sensible, much more targeted ideas about what we might do with it. Whereas I think for me, it was always quite an open project and more of a platform than a content producer, although we have ended up producing quite a lot of content. Yeah, I suppose the really unexpected thing for me is when audience members become content producers and become people who want to take part in conversations. And I've really enjoyed that. So where films spark later films or spark other kinds of collaborations, that's been really lovely. And yes, I'm astonished when I hear people who have watched particular films. People with particular specialisms don't necessarily watch the films that speak to those specialisms, and that's been very interesting. Lockdown happened just as I was about to run with Cal, actually, an event on professional wrestling and early modern theatre. And that we salvaged some of the material for that as a series of films on professional wrestling. And it's delighted and amazed me how many of our academic colleagues have been so excited, and some theatre practitioners as well, so excited about that strand of the work we've been doing. So I feel like we've outed a whole bunch of wrestling fans from the closet as a result of the bit. So I guess that's an example of what you're asking about.
Absolutely. Actually, before I come to Emma and Callan on audiences, Andy, I'm going to let you into kind of the back end of what's going on here where I am, which is that on my sheet of questions, potential questions, there is a line which reads, Andy, colon, a lot of these videos are about wrestling, dot, dot, dot. So it was something I'd hope to talk about. I mean, tell us a little bit more about the wrestling videos, because these are something that totally fascinated me.
So again, just to check, you're asking about the content of the wrestling. Sorry, as
Yeah,
you have
absolutely.
your coffee.
Yes.
Well, as I say, we were already in dialogue with some professional wrestlers around early modern theatre and forms of combat, combat as entertainment, essentially. So in a way, it was really exploiting and also making the most of the fact that we just set those conversations up, and suddenly our live in real life platform for those conversations had disappeared. It's, to be honest, they're very similar to all of our other films, I think, in that, you know, we've spoken to lovely, modest people, and in every single case, wrestling or otherwise, my sense is they've been really delighted to be invited just to speak at whatever length they would like and in whatever depth they would like to as wide an audience as they would like, and to take it seriously, hopefully in a way which is also open to fun and to live discovery and not taking ourselves too seriously. But I think wrestling is a really nice example of an art form which often is not taken seriously, is often not discussed for very good professional reasons as an art form, because that immediately interrupts its role as a performance, to discuss it, you know, to acknowledge and interrogate its status as a performance. But wrestlers are often incredibly articulate and excited to speak about what it is they do. And I guess the heart of it is simulating a competition via a collaboration. And I think that's really fascinating. You know, it's basically a form of dance, and inviting people to talk about what it is like to tell stories with your bodies together while simulating an act of emulation and competition is really quite interesting.
Really is, and it's so exciting. I can really recommend all the wrestling content to anyone looking through this. It raised a lot of stuff for my own thinking about late 16th century London as well. Callan, to come back to that question about audiences, do you have a sense of different audiences engaging with the content?
Yeah, I wonder if kind of one way to approach that question is to think about the logistics of what and the kind of infrastructure basically that we've tried to build. So Matt Martin, who made the A Bit Lit website, you know, really beautiful and slick site, and he built in a sort of an algorithm that allows films to, so when you have the film and you post it, at the bottom you'll see there are some suggested other films. And we can also, so that happens automatically, but we can also suggest some of those films. So if you're watching, you know, a film on wrestling, it might suggest that you watch a film on some other form of performance or something like that. And I think, you know, that has been where we might be thinking about how audiences work and how we might want to encourage kind of crossovers between two subjects that might seem very different. Is in trying to kind of curate that. I don't know whether we've necessarily got that right, and I don't know whether it's possible to check, you know, whether at all whether you get something like that right. But yeah, but there's a sort of, there's something within the infrastructure of the site that forces us to think about those questions a little bit, I think. Yeah, but maybe I'm handy.
But no, I love that idea of, yeah, the fact that it can suggest things and kind of lead people further down the rabbit hole is really exciting. Emma, any thoughts on audiences?
Yeah, I sort of want to jump on a couple of things that Cal and Andy were saying, because I think, yeah, it's really exciting that the website has that ability to draw you, as you say, John, down the rabbit hole. I think we've been interested recently in playing about with YouTube playlists as a different way of doing that. So those tend to be organized thematically, but not by period. So, you know, there's like a race strand, so all sorts of different research across different periods on race, or there's a making history strand where you might get people who are narrative non-fiction writers next to people who consider themselves, you know, professional historians, next to kind of some of Cal's Thinkrests series where you're thinking about history through material culture and through things. And I personally have been really enjoying playing with that, and I'm hoping that's something that we don't yet have the answers about because it's brand new, but I'm hoping that audiences might find that a different kind of rabbit hole that's kind of playing with traditional period and disciplinary divides. And yeah, and I have found it exciting how the fact that, as Andy said a bit earlier, we're able to be kind of, I guess, fans rather than experts in some of the sections enables us to also reach new audiences who are experts and who might bring their expertise to our videos where, you know, we're exploring things for the first time, and we're hoping who might then want to, yeah, as people have mentioned, make more videos. So I really felt that with the, I know it's not SRS related, but with my Austen series, because I'm just an Austen fangirl. I've never, you know, I've never even studied Austen as an undergraduate. I don't think. I felt too close to her. I felt I couldn't quite bear to. So I've been interviewing, yes, people who are Austen scholars, but also people who are journalists of Austen fan culture, who, you know, talking to Sophie about the Jane Austen House Museum was a recent one, talking to someone who designs a mobile app game that's Regency love, that's inspired by the structure of Jane Austen novels. And each of them brought their own Austen expertise, but also completely different disciplinary or approaches that then brought different audiences to us. That was really, it was exciting to get for us to not be the experts and to bring these expert audiences in.
And seeing you kind of explore that research area through conversation, I think, is really inspiring as well. That idea that, you know, when we come to something where we're not expert and we actually can construct these kind of conversations with the people who are, I think it's amazing to see what comes out of that. Emma, to stay with you for just a sec, I wanted to come back to your stay-at-home Shakespeare series, and in particular, what you've said about engaging with schools and teachers. Can you tell us a little, because that I think was a key idea for you at the beginning of the project. How has that gone and how has that played out?
So yeah, I'm happy to say a bit about it, and I wonder if I should then pass on to Andy, who's been looking at doing more things with schools and teachers, so just kind of the past
Perfect.
and the future Bitlit-wise. But yeah, I think it was very informal in that obviously I have some friends who are teachers, and so I sort of was aware from them kind of just personally that there was this feeling of a need for this, but it was very much trial and error as well, in that I was sort of putting them out. I would see some of them would get picked up and kind of get lots of views and some wouldn't, and that was of course partly just which were the Shakespeare set texts, but it was interesting getting a sense of which were useful in terms of approach as well. I think actually surprisingly the ones that were most based on my own research that I thought might be most niche, I think I got emails from teachers saying that they were helpful because they gave students a new angle to grapple with rather than being a sort of general introduction, which was interesting. I hadn't expected that. And actually, you know, some teachers have been really nice at emailing me and telling me exactly how they're using these videos in their lessons, which is just, it's gold dust, it's brilliant. And that wasn't formal, you know, that was just or on Twitter, that just sort of ended up happening. But I think, yeah, so it was sort of a trial and error working it out, but I was also lucky that one of my videos got picked up by the Brilliant Club, who, if people don't know, they're a charity that works with non-selective state schools with high achieving pupils to try and encourage aspiration to attend university, I suppose, but also to give PhD students the chance to share their research. And I used to be a tutor with them, and I shared one of the videos with them, which meant it got out to their Brilliant Club tutors. So it was, yeah, none of it was purposeful, but it did mean there were a few routes where people were able to engage with it. And so I'll pass on to Andy now.
Yeah, well, just to add, we're following up Emma's brilliant series by thinking about some more school-focused content. I have to confess it's taking us quite a long time, but we happen to be working with brilliant academics who are also doing things related to the ref, etc. So, you know, we're working around people's timeframes, of course, as always, but we're hoping to make 10-minute long films dedicated to particular parts of the school curriculum. We're particularly interested in making 10-minute academic films followed by 10-minute engaging with a performer to think about poetry, for example. I mean, the project has always been not just about celebrating the arts and humanities, but also defending them at a time of peril, various kinds of peril. And so, yeah, we would really like to go to, you know, the students who are at the rock face of the various issues with the school curriculum, and to try and make things which are both helpful but also hopefully transformative in their relationship with that material.
That's really fantastic. I want to come back to content, and in particular the way that you've worked with artists and with other creative people in just a minute. But actually, Andy, and this is your fault because you said the words, not me. You mentioned the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, and I actually just wanted to get a sense, and maybe this is something you've been thinking about a lot, I'm not sure, but one of the things that people often ask when they're thinking about doing new kinds of public engagement, there's often a lot of anxiety about how this fits into the sometimes narrow boxes of the various frameworks, whether they're institutional or the bigger frameworks of the ref, right? So thinking about, if I do this, I think a lot of us want to do these things because we think they matter. And our first question isn't how this is going to be refable or otherwise, but it seems to be the case that sooner or later there will be a kind of a gentle cough and someone will say, so that thing you're doing, how does that fit into this set of priorities or this institutional goal or whatever it might be? And I wondered if that's something that's been a feature of the project. Have you found yourselves having to articulate its value in terms of those frameworks? Is that something you think you'll have to do or that you want to do in future? Or do you see this as being something that's kind of outside of and separate to those frameworks of assessing kind of research and engagement? Andy, I don't know if we'll start with you. Is that a fair question? Is that horrible? Go ahead.
No. I mean, like so much of all of our work, it straddled awkwardly across those two things. It's an independent project and it's a project made by people who have ref-like commitments. I suppose I think primarily of the project in terms of strategy around recruitment more than anything, and not recruitment for a particular university or even for a particular discipline, but just combating the science fetish, which is built into the way the government thinks about education and research in this country, and trying to incentivize doing other things and also doing sciences. It's not an against the sciences project, but and as well as sciences projects. I mean, my advice always with the ref. I'm an ECR mentor at Roehampton, early career researcher mentor at Roehampton. So I spend a lot of time talking to people at the beginnings of their careers about ref strategy. And my suggestion has always been do the minimum that you need to do for the ref, get that done as soon as you can, and then you can get on and do things that matter for you. But I certainly don't think this is a kind of a project which is not helpful when it comes to thinking about the ref and about the sector's needs. But for me, it's very much more about recruitment and about opening up space for new kinds of conversation about the work that we do, rather than thinking in an especially refy way. Emma and Cal may feel differently.
Yeah, I don't know, Cal, is that something you've been thinking about?
I suppose, given what's happened in the last year to people's existing impact plans and other kinds of public engagement things, there's kind of scope to rethink, I guess, what something like impact might look like, even within the existing kind of parameters of how the ref analyzes it. And yeah, I guess it's never not on your horizon, is it, if you're working in higher ed in the UK? But I think at least for me, that there's room there to kind of experiment with a format and to do what we wanted to do, in the way we've just talked about it. And maybe that will help change the way we might think about impact in the future when we're approaching similar sorts of projects, because we haven't had a year like 2020 and early 2021 before. So maybe kind of flipping it on its head, I suppose, and allowing the project itself to just develop, and rather than building the impact in from the start when we can't necessarily foresee what that would be.
I think that's so interesting, is thinking about the impact of public engagement look fundamentally different from where we are right now compared to where we were 13, 14 months ago. Emma, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Cal was saying. I think that I've been thinking about this and having a couple of conversations about this. And yeah, as people have been saying, we didn't go into this going, this will be an impact case study. We sort of went into it being excited about the idea and wanting to see where it would go. I think it's interesting that probably in a kind of very narrow ref sense, the things that I personally could, use would just be the videos sharing my research. And it makes me think about those. So we've been recently doing a lot of participation and engagement logs on my modules, where getting students to, reflect on their own participation. And they have those marking criteria where it says, have you shared your own ideas? Have you facilitated others to share their ideas? Have you developed the ideas of others? And I feel like maybe we need that for ref, right? That it shouldn't just be about me personally sharing my stuff, tick. It should be about we're all helping each other share our stuff and opening up collaborations. And I highly doubt there will be that option on the next, who knows, but on the next ref. But I think what Cal said's right. It's worth opening up these questions of what is impact, what is public engagement.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's very much kind of a hobby horse of mine, is that I think that the work that you are doing of facilitating the conversations and making them happen is, and it helps to break that model of the idea like that the researcher has to be the genius about this particular thing, and actually says you can bring your skills and your knowledge and your networks and kind of create this much bigger impact in many ways. Sorry, I think someone was going to jump in there.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that, you know, well, exactly as we've just been saying, but the project has been largely done off our own kind of time and with some institutional backing. And I suppose it's when thinking about those kind of questions of funding and, you know, the future longevity of something and how you might build in a sort of a way for it to sustain itself, that these questions of, you know, framing and frameworks maybe come to bear on it. But yeah, so something, I guess, to continue to ponder in the future.
Absolutely. We can come back in 2022 and we can see where we are then. I think it's a really good point. I wanted to ask a bit more about the engagement that you've had as part of the A Bit Lit videos with, you know, people beyond academia and often with people in performance and in the creative industries. So this is something that I think marks and impacts your own work, all three of you, in really fascinating and interesting ways. You're all people who've been working at the intersection between academia and other kinds of creative work, and it's been really exciting to see that, you know, you've got interviews with novelists, that you've got, I think you've done a recent one which I haven't seen yet with Samira Ahmed as well. So you've got all these kind of fantastic people from the wider cultural and creative world coming in. And I suppose my question is, how do you see those conversations fitting in, and what do you hope will be the kind of outcome or the value of those conversations? Emma, I might start with you if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I was actually thinking about it while you were talking, and I was thinking, actually, maybe I'm the person on A Bit Lit who's done the least number of interviews with people in the performance world, which is weird because those are worlds I'm very interested in. But I think, yeah, I've just thought maybe I clearly need to do a lot more of that. I've certainly been enjoying everyone else's interviews, but I think the interviews that I've had with say narrative nonfiction writers, so I spoke to Caroline Crampton about that. I think I've been really interested in craft, and I feel like that's not something that we talk about that much as academics, and it's really interesting. And yeah, similarly, you know, watching other people's interviews with actors, with writers, with novelists, that sense of craft and of skill and of a very, I suppose, a different way of harnessing creativity has been really interested. And I suppose I see that as kind of, it's literally part of the big lit conversation, because these are literatures in a sort of broad sense, or part of the cultural landscape that we're researching. But I think obviously we hope it'll interest academics, but it'll reach beyond academia to, you know, readers, audience, people who go to the theatre who might be interested. But I think also there's something for me personally about, as an academic, looking at people who approach writing from a craft-based way rather than a research-based way, perhaps, that's really helpful and interesting.
Something we could all think about more. Absolutely. Andy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Emma's massively underselling herself. She's had dramaturgs in her films.
That's true. I had Anne. Yes, Anne was brilliant.
Yeah.
And sorry, just to jump in quickly there, she described why dramaturgy is like cartography in this amazing like spatial metaphor that I thought was absolutely brilliant, as someone who's always struggled to, while hugely respecting dramaturgs' work, to describe exactly what they do. It was a brilliant metaphor to explain it. Anyway, sorry, Andy.
I mean, I'm very comfortable, John, if you want to talk about bits of the project which have not worked as well, or have worked more slowly perhaps than we expected. But in some ways, sharing of creative work has not quite worked as I expected it to. And I think mistakes are just so different for creative practitioners talking about their work. And also academics are used to talking about their research, not necessarily in the format that we're offering, but you know, it's a recognizable, legible format for them in a way that it isn't for a lot of other kinds of practitioners. So we have had wonderful successes there, but I am struck that it's happened much more slowly, and we have the predominant mode is academic still, which is not at all what I was expecting. So it's kind of been that's been a big learning curve for me in lots of ways. But yeah, we're not a research project, but if we were, our research questions would basically be things like book, ? Literature, ? Arts and humanities, ? And not those questions cannot just be answered by academics. So it's all about bringing different people into the conversation. And one of the things I love about the platform is that we do have different films which can talk to each other without realizing it. But we can also bring in within one particular film people working across various different kinds of worlds. We're talking to Lisa Hopkins at the moment about making a film to celebrate the new Marlowe Journal, Christopher Marlowe Journal. And one of our ideas is to bring in some performers who've been in Marlowe in the last 10 years and get them speaking to Lisa and thinking about Marlowe that way. So setting up those sorts of conversations is something that's, I think, as you've said already, quite dear to the way all three of us think and work.
That's really fantastic. Callan?
Yeah, I don't know if I've much to add, and maybe this doesn't quite address the question, I don't know, but I guess to go back to what Andy's saying about earlier about defending the arts and humanities and kind of shoring them up, I think there's something important really about showing the vocational aspects of working in the creative industries at a time when there's quite a lot of negative ideas about what it might mean to go and study English literature or to go and study performance at university, and to show the connections between them, you know, the kind of theoretical or academic side of being engaged in arts and humanities, link in various different ways, or sometimes not necessarily directly link in to performance and to making practices. I mean, early on, I think Andy spoke with Catherine Richardson at Kent, who does lots of work on this, and she runs their Institute of Cultural and Creative Industries. I don't know if I've got that right way around, one of the two C's in the other direction. You know, and trying to build in, I guess, what the future of the different disciplines we work in might look like in the future, going forward, in terms of attracting students and in terms of selling the importance of it and the viability of it as a vocation, I suppose. And I think that's important to see that as a big body rather than as separate things.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that's really resonated in some of the ways that each of you have talked about this, and I say this, so I'm director of admissions in history at Leeds, so that's kind of one of the other hats I wear. And thinking about, you know, Andy, you spoke about recruitment in the broadest sense, and Cal, you're talking about these kind of careers and how it all kind of almost fits together, I think is really exciting and really important. So yeah, really, really fantastic to hear. I wanted to ask a bit more of a technical question, if that's okay, because, you know, part of what we're trying to do with these conversations is that if people want to emulate or think about doing something comparable in their own work, and I can certainly see the kind of the online conversations model becoming much more central to post-pandemic research projects, I think. I wanted to just ask a little bit about the back end and the work that goes into it. So we know from our own experience with this conversation that technical issues can happen. You've talked a little bit about the website design and about the production that goes into videos. So Cal, if I could start with you, do you want to tell us a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes in a Bitlit?
Well, I suppose, I mean, initially when we started out, it was very much sort of recording on Zoom and putting the product of the recording up on YouTube. But I think, you know, very quickly we managed to get to work with two brilliant people who do know the back end side of things, basically, in ways that we certainly don't. So a producer, James O'Prey, who was doing brilliant things with kind of cutting videos. I mean, it's even basic things, I think, that I certainly wasn't aware of, like when you press record on Zoom, you can record each different participant, and that makes it able to sort of mix it and things, which I had no idea about. So from those very rudimentary kind of angles of how might you get the best out of free technology, to then kind of scaling up what the project now looks like through Matt Martin's work in creating the website. And he did a really brilliant job. And actually, I think there's something quite interesting there about how the infrastructure of a Bitlit also shapes the kind of the way the project works. So it's not one thing kind of dictating the other, you know, because Matt, when he came to spoke to us, talked about the different options that you might be open to you for a project such as ours. And I think that really helped us think about that, back to those questions of audiences. Who do we want to attract? How do we want to, how can we make this as accessible as possible? going back to our kind of podcast thing that launched a few weeks ago, the kind of podcast strand of the project. So these kind of questions were really, I mean, I think we needed that kind of expertise, I think, and it's a creative expertise too, to open these questions up to us and to allow us to progress the project, really. But Andy and Emma will have more to say about that, I think.
Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, I mean, I think I have to give a huge shout out to James Apray for the 2 series, Stay at Home Shakespeare and At Home with Austen, because when I first wanted to do them, I sort of said to James, I've got some PowerPoint slides. I don't know how to put those in a video. You know, this was early in the pandemic. I hadn't yet had to record quite so many lectures. Could you put them in the video for me, please? And he said, yeah, I could do that. Do you want me to do anything else? And I was like, oh, what? And he was like, well, I mean, this one I was thinking is about, you know, this was the initial video on Macbeth about devils and kind of fouls, the fog and filthy air, you know, weather, sound effects. And he was like, well, I could put some fog across your face. I could have like a witch flying by. I could have a devil popping up in the background. And I was like, yes. So it's, you know, like Cal said, it's been a creative collaboration. It hasn't just been like James doing the mechanics. He like brought so much to those series and made them so much more exciting than what would have been just mini lectures from me. And he turned them into these like really fun, very kind of, I guess, explicitly school facing, although actually, you know, adults seem to enjoy them too, but you know, the research was rigorous, but the visuals were playful, and I think that was a really lovely and unexpected pairing.
They've really raised the bar for online lectures as well. I think if I'm doing any lectures online next year, I'm going to have to really reconsider what kind of a show I'm putting on. That's fantastic, Emma. Thanks so much. Andy, any thoughts on that?
Well, just respond to what you just said, John. Just adapt every single course you're teaching so that there's some sort of Jane Austen relevance, and then just pop our films in. You know, for anyone watching this, do use our content for teaching. It's absolutely what it was intended for. I guess there are 3 things I'll say. One is, if anyone does want to set anything up like this, do consider coming to us. We are a platform as well as people who produce our own content. And we'd be very happy to host things either as an end in itself, or if you wanted to just test out what it's like to make such a thing in order to then create your own project, we'd absolutely love to host that. So do consider either coming to us or talking to us if we can help. The second thing I'll say is that risk-taking and an embrace of failure is a cool way to live your life as far as I'm concerned, and to experiment and just to see and to try. And, you know, it wouldn't really have mattered if no one had watched our first initial films. I feel a bit more hungry for audiences now, because an awful lot of people have worked very, very hard for the platform. But at the start, it really wouldn't have mattered if no one came. It was just a trial to see if people would take interest. So I think, you know, floating a balloon or whatever the phrase is, just to see if there is an interest there, is a good thing to do. And in the first 6 months of the COVID outbreak, I was really struck by how extra playground-like Twitter became, in particular, with an awful lot of kind of shaming and policing of what people could and couldn't do with their time, either their professional or their personal time. And to combat that and say it's okay to try and make platforms for people to learn from each other, that's an okay thing to do, feels really important to me. And then, yeah, lastly, I guess, just thinking about what format you would want if you were setting up a project like this. In some ways, I think we're now making it a Zoom product at a time when people have moved on from Zoom, and we're living in we would all like to be in a post-Zoom world, and that's why we've moved to podcasts. And I think the films at the start were absolutely the right medium to go in. But we've reached a point where people quite rightly do not want to look at a screen for more time than they have to. So thinking through what your platform is and what you'd like to do with it and how it will work for your audience or your listeners is really fundamental, I think, for anyone thinking about a project such as this.
Well, that actually is something I wanted to ask about right away, which was the move to podcasts. And well, you've given us a sense of what's motivated that. How, again, you know, maybe this is the back end question again, but how has that worked? How is that different to making videos as a process?
We don't know yet. We've only just launched in the last couple of weeks. We don't even have data on whether anyone is using them. So we're not quite sure yet. John, I don't know when your film is coming out, but if people are listening to this in the first 8 weeks of the podcast, I urge people to race to the podcast and listen to it, because there's this crucial 8-week period where the big platforms like Apple and Spotify, they decide if you are a successful or an unsuccessful podcast. There is nothing in between in those first 8 weeks. So by all means, have us on mute. Don't listen to us, but play us. That would be really great, please. So yeah, we're not quite sure how it's being used yet, but it was something that we wanted to do from the outset. And as Callan said, this is a project being run by people in their spare time, and there are challenges to getting that done. So it's been quite hard to get the podcast off the ground, and we will learn over the next few months, I think, whether people are using it. But my hunch is that we may well be used more as a podcast than as a film platform, I suspect. We have some exciting animations on their way, some cartoon films, so obviously those will not be podcastable, and that might keep the heart of the film project. But I suspect the majority of our audience might migrate to the podcast form. We'll see.
It'll be exciting to see. And this should be out pretty quickly, I would reckon, in early April. So anyone watching, please head straight to your podcast provider of choice and get downloading and liking and subscribing to A Bit Lit. Andy, you've kind of started off answering what was going to be my final question to all three of you, which is, what next for A Bit Lit? I'm interested as we stagger, crawl towards what might be a post-pandemic or at least a post-lockdown future, and that's obviously any number of caveats that you want to add to that, please do. It's got to be a multi-caveated statement. But as the situation in the latter part of 2021 is going to hopefully at least look different to, if not better than, what we've seen in the last year or so, I'm interested to get a sense for each of you of what you think that will mean for A Bit Lit and maybe what forms it might take on. So, Cal, we might start with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we're talking about quite often when we kind of talk together as a team, really. And I would say there's not necessarily anything set in stone. And as you say, these are things that the project itself is kind of discovering different ways to advance and unfurl as we go on. I think locatedness is something we'll probably think about a little bit. I know Andy might say a word or two more about that. But obviously we're in this kind of non-specific box when we're on Zoom, and you feel very sort of out of a sense of place. And I think it might be nice to kind of give a sense of location to people once everybody's back out discovering their kind of localities. And that's not just, we three are both in the bounds of the UK, but I think it'd be really nice to get a sense of, all the world, all the international contributors we've had and hope to have going forward. So that sense of actually seeing outside our four walls would be really nice. But yeah, I know other people have more to say about that.
That sounds pretty dreamy. Andy, any thoughts? What next?
Well, from the first film, I've never, and from my own, within my own personal life, when COVID happened, I've never really assumed that there would be a post-COVID world. I've got no idea if there will be or not. But what could be more early modern than having to run your life around regular outbreaks of public illness? And I know that potentially sounds really, really glib, but I take comfort in the fact that we know that historically this actually isn't that unusual, and there are ways of organising around it. So who knows what the future will hold? As Cal has tantalisingly suggested, we are doing some location stuff. So our very first location day is the first half of the day taking Sarah Dustiger around London to celebrate her new dictionary of Shakespeare in London, and then the second half of the day working with an artist in his studio making films around his work, and that's Gavin Johnson, who is also an Olympic athlete. So we'll be talking about that combination of sport and art, which I'm really looking forward to. As we've discussed, we've got some school-focused content coming its way. We've got some animation coming its way, and that's for the project Box Office Bears that John, you mentioned earlier. And the last new strand, which I'm excited about, and I think, John, you'll be very pleased to hear, is a strand on cookery writing, starting with the cook Olia Hercules.
Incredible.
Yes, there's a format that really, really fascinates me. And that, again, it's like the wrestling film, right? What happens if you point at this particular form and say, what does this mean as a book? What does it mean as an art form? What is this thing doing? I'm really looking forward to that. The last thing I'll say is that another answer to your question, John, of what is our future, very much depends on our audience. I know I keep saying it, but we're very happy to have topics suggested to us, contributors suggested to us, and we're happy to hand films over. We don't need to be involved with those films. And some of our best films have been ones, with great respect to the people in this conversation, in which the three of us do not appear. And other people have used the films as an opportunity to consolidate existing collaborative relationships, but also to invent new ones as well. I'm thinking, for example, about Liz Oakley-Brown working with Cal and Michael Lewis to start a new conversation between Michael and Liz. The films are there to do with what you will, and we can edit them in post-production. They are very safe spaces to take chances in. We will not put anything out people do not want going out. So the audience is also our future, I guess. As advisors and as content producers, we are very delighted to hear from them.
I think that's really exciting. I know that I have been kind of murmuring threats of doing something for a bit late for many months now. It might be time for me to finally come good on it.
Whenever you're ready.
Emma, I'm going to give the last word to you on the what next question.
Gosh, what a responsibility. I mean, I think everything that Cal and Andy have said there, I absolutely agree with. And I do think that Andy's last point about basically diversifying the voices that are speaking on this platform would be so exciting for us. And I think also, we are three people who vagaries can interrupt our film production. I, for example, haven't produced any films in a few weeks because it's been just an intense term time. Mm-hmm. I'd hate for a bit lit to just be dependent on how able each of us are to talk to other people when there are so many interesting people having such interesting conversations that the platform could host. And Tom Harrison did some great videos where he hosted. Elizabeth Tavares shared a great conversation. It would just be really lovely to think that it could multiply and more voices could come on board and more people could make videos. So if I could do a 2-year prediction of BitLit, what I'd like to see is lots of us being in real life places because the plague has not come back and we are all there. Lots of kind of cool visual stuff happening in the videos and lots of kind of long conversations happening on the podcast because there is so much more room to just, I listen to 1.5 hour long podcasts while I'm cleaning. I feel like there is more room for those more expansive conversations in a podcast format. But I'd also like to see if you did another one of these in 2 years, that there'd have to be 20 little squares because lots of people are hosting. That would be my dream.
That sounds absolutely fantastic to me. Well, Emma, Andy and Callan, thank you so much for coming to talk to me today. I've learned a huge amount. I know that people are going to really enjoy, if they haven't already, I mean, who hasn't, but if people haven't already delved into the world of a bit lit, hopefully this is going to give them the impetus to do so. And I think for the audience, for these videos as well, there's so much food for thought about how we can do public engagement in a way that that helps our disciplines, that helps create these conversations, that helps to break down those barriers, and that helps to defend the bigger project of the arts, the humanities, and creative work as well. So that's something that's so exciting to me, and I think to many of our audiences, and to my dog, who you might have heard barking during Andy's final remarks as well. So there's kind of cross-species appreciation. Thank you all so much for making the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.